We're in the middle of a little series called Faith, Hope and Love. And we're now going to read or reread the reading we had from Corinthians last week. And Linda is going to do that for us. Thank you, Linda.
And yet I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in human or angelic tongues, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now, we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
Thank you, Linda, very much. That's a really helpful one. So the three of these remain: faith, hope, and love. Friends, I owe you an apology to kick off with, which is never a great way to start, is it? But this morning we're going to enjoy communion together. So if you want to nip out whilst the sound is on loud and get some wine or some juice and some bread, then that would be great. Do you know, this book, the Bible, you know, everybody thinks it's a nice thing, a nice Bible, full of God and nice people getting on, having nice thoughts. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah, it is full of God, but it's full of human beings with all their human frailties and all their humanness on show. And that's what we have just read. It's a letter to a church in a place called Corinth. Corinth looks a little bit like that, bit of a doer-upper, I think it would be fair to say these days. But Corinth was this amazing town, or it became an amazing town, an amazing city. It was small, dormant, and then the Romans kind of got hold of it, and it became the largest city in the whole of Roman Greece. Great location, great for commerce, and it was kind of new, it was cosmopolitan, it was nouveau riche, which I understand is a posh way of saying that's where the money was. And because of all this, because of its success, well, it had a very high view of itself. And so, as part of having a high view of itself, it starts having a row with Paul. And in fact, writes to Paul and says, well, with the greatest of respect, mate, we think you are wrong. We think you're wrong. Now, some people say that it's just a misunderstanding. Or some other people say, well, actually, it is deliberate. The people in Corinth deliberately misunderstood Paul. And what did they misunderstand him about? Well, they misunderstood him about what it was to be spiritual. And so there's this exchange of letters which goes on, which forms a row between them. And Paul, in this letter, this first letter to Corinth, simply says, look, guys, gifts like tongues and prophecy are fantastic. They're great gifts because they come from our Father God in heaven. And as a father, he knows how to give good gifts. They are great, but unless you have faith, which we looked at last week, hope, which we're looking at today, and love, then you're missing the point. You're missing the point. Corinthians, get over yourself. Get some perspective. Have a sense of humour. More than that, get yourself some humility. Trust me, there is a time that's coming that will knock these things into a cocked hat. There are going to be times when these things look, well, childish. There are going to be times when these things look like a poor reflection in a mirror. And Paul uses the word mirror because Corinth was the place where mirrors were produced. Not mirrors like you and I would know them. Mirrors, well, highly shined, highly polished bits of metal. Paul says, trust me. There's a time coming when all this will be as child's play, as a reflection in a mirror. We will know fully then. But until then, the important things are hang on to faith, hope, and love. What Paul is saying is, God's busy. History is going somewhere. And we, as his church, as his creation, are invited to join in. In my life, there are many sentences that start off like this. The trouble with you is, and there's usually a finger pointed at me. And people say, oh, the trouble with Dave Hitchcock is, well, he's male and pale and frail, which, doesn't exactly bless me, but there you go. And then, outside the church, people say, well, he's a Christian, don't you? And then they say, it's even worse. He's a minister. And then that's kind of how you get left on your own at parties and wedding receptions. But it isn't just outside the church. It happens to me inside the church. Oh, well, the trouble with you, Dave Hitchcock, is... And I can remember being a speaker at a conference, and I introduced myself, and they said, oh, what are you? And I said, oh, I'm a Baptist minister. And they said, oh, right, so you're not very spiritual then, are you? Because you don't believe in spiritualities as a Baptist. Friends, if you have had that same experience where you have been dismissed because, well, you're not spiritual enough, or you're not spiritual at all, can I say, on behalf of the church, representing the whole of the worldwide church, I'm really sorry. And what those people needed to hear is what the Corinthians needed to hear, which was this. These things remain: faith, hope, love. Rely on those, chase those, own those, exhibit those. Now, my other confession this morning is I play golf. I've already admitted to that. And I'm ambitious when I play golf. And because of my ambition, this is where I usually end up. And quite often, people like Andy Simmons will say to me when I'm aiming for an ambitious shot, Dave, you've got two hopes. Bob Hope and no hope of making that shot. Dave, you've got two hopes. And that's true in life. I know it's a cheesy link, but it's true, isn't it? We have hopes for a couple of reasons, it seems to me. Either we are convinced because our life tells us, our instinct tells us, our gut feel tells us that life's going to be better, things are going to improve, things aren't going to remain this dark. There's something in us that tells us that we can be hopeful for the future. Or we've experienced hope before. We've hoped that someone will give us a gift or someone will be kind to us, and they have been because it's their character. And we're hopeful that that will be our experience again. The dictionary says that hope is the anticipation that the future will be better than the present. Psychologists say that hope is the anticipation which is absolutely essential to human well-being. The Bible uses a whole bunch of different words meaning hope. In the Old Testament, there's a couple of words that I'd like to talk to you about this morning. First of all, there's this word called yachal. And yachal simply means to wait, to anticipate. It's the word that's used when Noah's on the ark and he looks around him and sees all the flood water, and he has to wait for the flood waters to subside. Or there's another word in the Old Testament called chavar. And calf is the word for cord. It's when you stretch a rope and it's got tension in it. And everybody's if you hold it at tension for a long time, eventually it will snap. And it's that hope, it's that anticipation that something is going to happen. But of course, hope in the Bible is bigger than that. Not a hope in a what, but a hope in a who. It's hope in God Himself. It's not a blind optimism that it'll all come out in the wash in the end, but it's a hope in God. Why? Because He's done it before. Hope is based in God's faithfulness in the past, which means we can be hopeful for the future. We can look forward by looking backwards. Our past experience gives us hope for the future. Faith and hope in God's character. In the New Testament, there's another word that's used. It's called elpis, which is, again, a hope based on God being at work. God being at work, most notably in the person of Jesus. A living hope that helps us to live well in the here and now and in the future. Jesus, this person who is a foretaste of what God is about. History is going somewhere. God is busy. And we get the opportunity to join in. We look back to a risen Christ, and we can look forward to our future with confidence. We wait. We hope. Now, I don't want this to be one of those sermons that is all sort of pie in the sky, but because I want to acknowledge that we live in some tricky times, some dark times. As I was preparing for this, I came across a Barack Obama quote, or it was an interview that he was doing with Oprah Winfrey. And she was talking to him about how he feels about the current times, and he talks about the dark times. And then he says that he's always helped by one of his heroes, Martin Luther King, who says these words, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Yeah, we may be living in dark times. We may be living in difficult times. We may be living in deep times. But Martin Luther King says that the arc of the moral universe is upward, onward, and is reason for us to have hope. Is it enough for us as Christians to say, oh, we will sit here, we wait, we hope for heaven, and that's our job done? No, absolutely not. As one preacher put it, Christianity isn't about pie in the sky when you die. It's about steak on your plate while you wait. Why? Because God is busy. History is going somewhere. and we have the opportunity to join in. I've had the enormous privilege of working with many great people, and Tom Wright is one of those people. And Tom, who has written extensively on hope, says this, and I've just realised I've got my glasses on so I can't read the auto cue. Tom says, what we believe about life after death directly affects what we believe about life before death. For if God intends to renew the whole creation, and if this has already begun in Jesus' resurrection, the church cannot stop at saving souls, but must anticipate the eventual renewal by working for God's kingdom in the wider world, bringing healing and hope in the present life. The Christian faith is about bringing healing and hope in the present life, looking back towards God and what he has done throughout history, and moving forward. Now, guys, I really want to be clear here. I don't want you to think that I am saying that, make Jesus your choice and drive a Rolls Royce and all those crass, terrible, terrible sayings. And I'm not saying, I am saying that we should be hopeful. We should be people of hope. We should be about the business of hope. But that doesn't mean that the effects of COVID are going to disappear. It doesn't mean that employment and finance are just going to magically be ours to enjoy. Loneliness is still going to be a factor in our families, in our communities, in our neighbourhoods. Relationships will still need to be mended. But hope means that we should look forward to the future, trusting in God's character, being hopeful that God, who said he would never leave us and never forsake us, will be with us on this dark and sometimes difficult and deep journey. I love oratory. I love good oratory. And when I was preparing for what I was going to say this morning, I started whizzing around the internet like you do, and I came across this picture. And this picture is painted by an artist called George Watts, and it's called Hope. And this picture has inspired some great men and great orators, and we've already met them this morning. One was Martin Luther King, and this picture inspired him to write a sermon about dark times. And in that sermon, he uses this great story, which I'd love to share with you now. So Martin Luther King says these words, that if I was standing at the beginning of time with the possibility of taking a panoramic view of human history, and if the Almighty said to me, Martin Luther King, what era would you like to live in? I would take my virtual flight via Egypt and would watch God's children in their magnificent trek from their dark times in the dungeons of slavery, across the Red Sea and through the wilderness to the Promised Land. And in spite of his magnificence, I would not stop there. I would go on to 1863 and I would watch a vacillating president finally come to the conclusion that he had to make the Declaration of Emancipation. But friends, I wouldn't stop there. I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you would allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I'll be happy. I'll be happy. And I know that this is a strange statement because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land. Confusion is all around. It's a strange statement. But I know this. But I know Only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. In the middle of some of the darkest chapters of American history, Martin Luther King chooses to be hopeful. The picture that we've just seen, Hope by Watts, also inspired another man, Jeremiah Wright, who you will never have heard of, I guess. But Jeremiah Wright preached a sermon called The Audacity of Hope, and he preached it to his church congregation, and in this congregation was a skinny black kid. That's how he describes himself. This skinny black kid went on to be the 44th president of the United States, one Barack Obama. Barack Obama became known because of a speech he made in July the 27th, 2004. It was his first speech on a big stage at the Democratic National Congress. And he asked a bunch of questions which are as relevant today as they were when he spoke them. He said this: do we participate in a politics of cynicism, or in a life and politics of hope? I'm not talking about blind optimism or willful ignorance that bad things will disappear if we just don't think about them. I'm talking about something far more substantial. I'm talking about the hope of slaves sitting around a campfire singing freedom songs. I'm talking about the hope of immigrants setting out for a distant land. I'm talking about the hope of a skinny black kid with a funny name who believes the world has a place for him. I'm talking about hope in the face of difficulty, hope in the face of uncertainty. I'm talking about the audacity of hope, God's greatest gift to mankind, a belief in things not seen, a belief that there are better days ahead. Wonderful, wonderful oratory. Hope, the audacity of hope. It's only when it's dark do you get to see the stars. The audacity of hope in those moments are God's greatest gift to mankind. Earlier this year, we saw a skinny black girl. Again, that's how she describes herself, Amanda Gorman, at the inauguration of the 46th president. She stood and read a poem which she had written. And everybody agrees that it was the highlight of the inauguration. And Amanda Gorman's poem finishes like this: When the day comes and we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid, the new dawn blooms as we free it. There is always light, if we're only brave enough to see it. There is always light, if we're only brave enough to be it. It's a magnificent poem, and I recommend it to you. I wish I could ask her permission, but I've done it anyway. I think it's equally true to say that when day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always hope, if we're only brave enough to see it. There is always hope, if we are brave enough to be it. Do we see hope? Are we brave enough to recognize it? Are we brave enough to be it? Right at the end of the Bible, in a little letter called 1 Peter, written by Peter, strangely enough, he is talking to the church, again in dark times, and he simply says this: friends, set apart Christ as Lord, follow Jesus, focus on Jesus, and then always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason, for the hope that you have. Do this with gentleness and respect. That's the job of the church. To be hopeful, to be people of hope, to be about the business of hope. Why? Because we see hopefulness in the death of Jesus, when the whole world seems to have fallen apart, because we know that was Friday, but Sunday was coming. We have reasons to be hopeful. It's in the very nature of God.